Almost 48% of California's total land area is governed by the federal government. We're talking about United States Forest Service, and we're talking about the Bureau of Land Management.
These are the national parks and other...
Yeah, and the National Park Service would be the third one. This is all federal control, federal management. When you hear the federal politicians complaining about state policy, it's like, well,
they meant Democrats,
is that really?
Probably.
It's true.
Gotta be there, I'm losing my cool, I'm on the edge, something's taking over me, I'ma be down on my knees, you know I'm ready for this, you keep me begging for this.
This is the Ocio show with Rahul, where I have deep conversations with interesting people on topics that are meaningful, slightly personal, and perhaps controversial.
Roll with this. I could do this all day, I could do this all day, back up, I'ma run this town, I'm headed for the top and you know it's going down.
When I looked at the history of origin of people living in California, basically everybody goes back to the savannas of Africa, and then there was a migration from Africa back in, I don't know, so many years ago.
Oh, sure. If you go far enough back, we're all Africans.
Far enough. So if you go really far enough back, and then everybody's from Africa. A lot of people went to the Middle East today, and then part of them went to Europe, part of them came to India, and then from India they went to what is today Singapore, Australia. There was the seas were frozen. They went to Australia, that got populated, and some of them went up China, Russia, and then the Bering Sea froze, and then they came over to North America through Alaska, came down all the way to Canada, and then through the Panama Strait went down to South America. So if you look at it, we are all from not California, we are probably from Africa. To your point about colonial mindsets and the travel and education, we know that we're not from here, we're all from somewhere else, depending on how far you go back. You have researched fire extensively in California, and you consider it more as a feature than a bug. Why so?
Right. This is a point of dire importance, as a matter of fact. That fire in California doesn't exist as some sort of remainder of an equation that has yet to be balanced. Land fire in California is not a bug of the system. Land fire in California is the system. All arboreal habitats and grassland habitats in California have a relationship to fire, either adapted to or dependent upon the regular return of fire, as a nutritive element in the landscape, as a disturbance factor that actually engages a succession cycle, an adaptive cycle that frees niche resources such that the ecosystem can continue to be abundant productively.
It's almost like it's as essential as like a volcano that actually erupts and then makes that land fertile, and it's not, whether we want it or not, it's going to happen. That's the nature.
Oh, okay, so you're talking about soil generation.
In a similar way, maybe people should think about fire as opposed to, hey, we're not managing something properly.
As a geochemical force, that's exactly what fire does. Land fire, combustion fire, as opposed to geologic fire, which is what volcanoes represent and supply. What land fire does, the burning of organic matter and hydrocarbons across the landscape, actually shocks the ground with these different chemicals, including nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. The list goes on and on. This is fertilizer. That's why so many trees in California won't actually drop their seeds until they have temperatures exceeding 450 degrees.
Yeah.
You look at the Palisades slope where we just had that horrendous tragedy, that urban fire. People often call it a wildland urban interface. But that was an urban fire. I mean, sure, it was started in quote unquote wildland, land that hadn't burned in 40 years. Okay. But that fire swept down the neighborhood of Palisades, the alphabet streets, with such force. You look at a picture of the Palisades from the 1920s before the developers came, there's not a tree there. This was a burn plain. That's a neologism. The that I coined. As you've heard of floodplains, there's also like the idea of the burn plain. Like the Chumash who lived there, remember we were talking about people who have always been here. The Chumash who lived here for tens of thousands of years burned that every year for food stores. That land has co-evolved to burn. And when I say food stores, I'm talking about dozens of species, acorns, nuts, seeds, bulbs. It's a supermarket. Fire affords a supermarket in the California landscape.
This is after the fire it grows.
After the fire grows.
Yeah.
There's really two Californias, Northern and Southern California. Across Northern California, there's a great fire drought. Remember I was talking about fire exclusion policies across the 20th century. Pre-contact fire regimes were upwards of 6 to 10 million acres a year in indigenous, a mixed severity mosaic burns across the landscape. This is how California co-evolved with fire, the human application of fire. California burns because of decisions that people make. It has always been this way. Oftentimes that manifests as decisions that humans don't make. Okay, so you figure about 15% or so of fires over the past 30 years were natural sources, namely lightning. Like down here in Santa Cruz, we had the big CZU fire in 2020, and that was sparked by lightning. But still, lightning happens onto land management regimes and designations that are designed by the human element inside the landscape, you see. What Southern California has, though, is a great fire glut. Great fire drought in Northern California, great fire glut in Southern California. Chaparral forests are not meant to burn as much as they are being burnt. And so now it appears that the Altadena fire was started by high-tension electrical lines that sparked in the Santa Ana winds. And so burying the lines is something that our public utilities can do. PG&E is into it right now. I guess they've done about 1,000 miles so far with a goal of doing 10,000 miles of buried lines. It costs a lot. It's like $3 million a mile to bury these lines, you know? So that's why all of our rates are going up.
Personally, I would like them to bury all the power lines in San Francisco too, because that's better. But
I
but
agree.
sure,
I
for
agree.
other reasons as well.
Almost 75% of the land that has burned in the past 100 years in California burned within the last 20 years. There's a number of factors. Remember I said decisions that people make. There are climactic factors. The century between 1850 and 1950 was the rainiest century in the past 2,500 years across California. A lot of rain, a lot of growth. The fieriest decade, if you will, the decade with the most calamitous fire across California in the 20th century was the 30s. And we saw some big fires in the 30s. And so with great military force was fire excluded and suppressed over the next several decades. And then what you have there is just a postponement. A fire suppressed is a fire postponed.
It's gonna happen.
It's
not a matter of if. huh?
Without fire, you get this cascading effect across the landscape, bro. If I can't elaborate, it's like you get these overpopulated, water-stressed forests that need fire. There's a covenant that has been lost between people and fire on the landscape. As if, like, the trees themselves, you go to the southern Sierra Nevada at 4,000 feet, like an old-growth ponderosa forest maybe has 40 stems per acre. Now it's over 1,000 stems per acre, right? And they're all about like 6 inches diameter breast height, DBH, which is how foresters measure trees, you know. And what you get there is these incredibly virulent vectors then of arboreal diseases. You get fungal blights. You get a water stress emits a pheromonic megaphone towards all of these beetle species that then propagate in huge numbers to kill tree after tree. So now you have this overpopulation of just dead trees that are little more than now kindling, waiting to go, right? And so given that calamitous equation, that calamitous cascade of effects, it's like we see more and more counterintuitive truths. Like in the 21st century, this act of like getting right with fire will be encountering this great axiom that with more fire comes less fire. If you can wrap your brain around that one. More fire means less fuel for tomorrow's fires. Los Angeles is the greatest real estate scheme in the history of humanity. Building this megalopolis 100 miles from the nearest fresh water source was a dicey proposition to start with. It continues to be. And yet, do not bet against human ingenuity, do what it wants to do. And now what we've got here is a landscape where 3/4 of its population live where only 1/4 or less of the rain actually falls, right? Southern California, as opposed to Northern California. So the whole idea behind California water is getting the water from Northern California to Southern California. And that puts San Francisco, or specifically the San Francisco Bay Delta, in the crosshairs of such an infrastructural proposition. And we are still talking about it to this day. We're still talking about it every day, about how to get all this water from point A, which would be like the Feather River and the Sacramento River, 400 miles south to municipal applications. But you know what? This is all obfuscation. 80% of California's infrastructural water, meaning all of our storage, all of our impoundments, 80% of that water goes to 3% of our gross domestic product, which is the agricultural sector. Only 3%. But that's where all the almonds and strawberries and all that stuff comes from. It's the breadbasket of California. It's the breadbasket of America. It's one of the most agriculturally productive corners of the planet. I'm talking about the San Joaquin and the Sacramento River valleys. And yet the California Water Project, that's the state water, and the California Aqueduct are really agricultural vehicles. And then when you think about so what's the urban sector then? That other only 20% goes to the people. 40% of that water goes to outdoor landscaping. So we're really only
like
thinking about
12%.
exactly.
Then,
Things
hey, how
like
much water can
drinking
you
and
drink,
showering and laundering. When considering the value of the species or calling it worthless is the height of ignorance. What is worth what? We've been thinking about it this month with the fires in California. What is worth what? What the Delta smelt represents is an indicator species. This is what ecologists will call it, an indicator species. And what it indicates is the health of the ecosystem. Were it to go away, it would be the end of a particular kind of hope for an ancient system that has nurtured human communities for tens of thousands of years. And so saying that it is worthless, I would agree with Leopold in saying that this is the height of human ignorance.
But I think looking at a certain line of thinking in our political society today, there is a clear distinction on the pecking order. Like human beings come first, and then comes the next, and then the Delta smelt is way down somewhere, and you got to prioritize,
rich human beings,
rich human beings, and then the poor,
probably of some racial persuasion, probably of some sexual orientation. Like these are the humans that come before. These are more equal than the other.
Hey, are we going back to like 1920s Europe?
Yeah, it's all very Orwellian, right? These humans are more equal than these humans, Yeah, you're right. There's some sort of biological truism there too, that like any species with the ability to exploit will exploit. And that's what we're doing. Isn't that a strange cop-out? Because we do have the capacity to engage these systems of reciprocity. I'm not in it for the shareholders. What I'm in it for are my grandkids' grandkids. I want them to know this place. I want them to be able to enjoy this place. And I want to not make my fortune off of their fortune. I don't want to steal from them. And that's the proposition on the table.
You want your great-grandkids to witness California the way you did, but there are a lot of people out there who wants to make money out of California and then live in a rich mansion somewhere.
We get 5 years of drought here in 21st century California. We go, oh, lament, things are so bad. You look at the paleoclimatology of California and you recognize that there have been several mega droughts in the past 1,000 years, just in the past 1,000 years, that have lasted for almost a century. California knows how to get hot. California knows how to get dry. And here's another thing. Remember in last segment I said that fire is always on the way. Drought's on the way too. We've seen 5-year droughts. Remember I was talking about the rainiest century in California in the past 2,500 years? Now we've got the prospect, especially with continued temperature increase, continued aridity, we've got the prospect of a pending mega drought. I mean, after 20 years of drought, we're going to see cities start to be abandoned. And there's little that can be done with regard to that in the human population. And it may be a great equalizer. Remember we were talking about parameters of homeostasis being adjusted. And maybe the experiment gets radically altered such that 40 million, 60 million people here by 2050 in California. Maybe that's too much. But I'm not some Malthusian alarmist. Thomas Malthus was an economist who 18th century predicted that in the 1900s there would be mass death. And it's like, well, that hasn't happened because of starvation and exceedance of carrying capacity of any given ecosystem. I'm not that, okay? Because I'm never going to bet against our species to figure out a problem. 20 years before the gold rush, there was the fur rush with all those mountain men walking up the streams, later to get state parks named after them, I guess. And what they were doing is just bashing beaver, one per every kilometer of water course in the state, like 15 million beaver, sending their pelts to New York to then get made into hats, disintegrate in a couple of decades, for some fashion idiocy. And so now we lose our beaver. And our beaver, what did our beaver do for tens of thousands, for hundreds of thousands of years?
Build dams.
They build dams, and what do those dams do? Those dams govern California's endemic systems of hydrology. So you remember 1 beaver per kilometer of water course, and what a beaver does by way of its own behavior, making a dam, building a lodge, and the pond that forms behind the dam, what you get is upwards of a 50-fold increase of biodiversity in that immediate habitat area. Not to mention what it does to the water. It slows the water, spreads the water, and sinks the water. That's according to the analysis of my friend the water druid Brock Dolman up at the Ecology Center of Sonoma, when he said, slow it, spread it, sink it. And that is the key to having water regardless of whether or not it's raining or not. So now the state's finally getting into the fight here in 2025. We've got a beaver task force. We're reintroducing beaver into our mountain lakes and streams. We've got some of our best minds working on that. Not only beaver, but beaver analog technology. Building do the beavers have to do it, or can we do it? Well, it turns out we can do it too.
Bioengineering, they call it, right? Or biomimicry.
Yeah.
We do it ourselves.
Oh, I like that. Nature-based solutions is how the governor refers to it. But that's exactly right. Because beavers, you introduce too many beavers, especially in suburban areas, it's like they don't really do what you want them to do where you want them to do it.
Yeah.
That can be a problem.